Welcome to this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather on the 17th day of July 2022. Up first, there are no hazardous weather around the state. We're looking at the hazardous weather graphics here. There are no advisories, watches, or warnings out anywhere around the state. The wind advisory for the eastern Alaska range west of the Toe Cutoff has ended at noontime as winds diminish there. So no big storms in the offing, at least to produce any advisories or warnings around the state. And checking the fire danger, almost non-existent now with the widespread rainfall across the area for some time now. Up on the north slope, western north slope, got an area of high fire danger. Otherwise, some areas of medium as you head east. Those kind of taper off as you go east. And really nothing south of the Brooks Range at all in the low category. And moving on to satellite imagery, you can see a lot of clouds over the central and eastern part of the state that extend from the Brooks Range on down to the North Gulf Coast, and big mass of clouds sliding into the southeast coast. Clearing behind that one system there, starting to clear out Kodiak Island in that west-northwest flow. And also over the Alaska Peninsula, some good sunshine there into Bristol Bay, allowing temperatures into the upper 60s and near 70 by mid-afternoon. Sunshine, clear skies, Pribilof Island, St. Paul reported clear skies, but St. George had some 700-foot strato Q around, and so IFR flying there at times, but basically a good day out there. Aleutian's not too bad as well, especially for the Fox Islands. And some clearing there from the Yukon Delta, and partly sunny skies. Kuskokwim Delta extends up to the western Arctic coast. Then you get in some loose scattered clouds over the central and eastern Arctic coast and north slope. And putting this into motion, you can see another system pushing across into the northern Bering Sea and the Bering Strait there, spreading some clouds up into the looking at the infrared now, spreading clouds with that, already pushing into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta area and in toward Togiak Bay, but staying pretty much to the north of the Pribilof Islands. And then the clouds hung up over the central interior, slowly clearing out, moving eastward, another band there over the Kuskokwim Valley and the western Alaska range, trying to jump the mountains there into the south central Alaska area this afternoon, but it's going to weaken as it does so. It may keep the shower activity going this evening, but rainfall amounts will be lighter as the main bulk of the moisture pushes off to the east, and then it'll be increasing out west with the incoming system coming across the northern Bering Sea. On the chart today, pretty widespread rain, as I mentioned, fairly heavy amounts to the southwest of McGrath. Flat had 1.31 inches, and McGrath had the heaviest, or not McGrath, Yakutat had the heaviest one, and 2/3 inches falling there. In the last 24 hours, Iliamna picked up an inch of rain. Anchorage at Ted Stevens Airport had 3/4 of an inch of precipitation, with pretty good rainfall amounts all the way up into the southern slopes of the Brooks Range there. Basically dry on the north slope and the Arctic coast, some fog there. Gusty winds 30-35 miles an hour along the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta coast into the northern Bristol Bay areas. Cape Newenham 35 miles an hour, peak wind gusts for example, and Cape Romanzoff about the same thing there. Otherwise, inch of rain plus falling, as I mentioned, for the entire North Gulf Coast. Cordova at about 1 1/4 inches falling, and that on into western Prince William Sound as well. Rain spreading into the Panhandle, but amounts were lighter as you head south toward Dixon Entrance. And the Aleutians, not too bad today, again with a clearing over the Alaska Peninsula, Fox Islands area, and the Pribilofs, also with weak high pressure, light winds across the entire Aleutian chain today. For tonight, you can see that low hung up over the Chukchi Sea up there, so sitting associated with the upper level low, really not moving too fast, but the flow on the south side of that carrying disturbances eastward. pretty good jet right across the Bering Sea. Westerly flow will push that front and another round of moisture into the western interior. More of a showery condition from the Kuskokwim Valley into south central Alaska tonight, possibly drying out completely. Southern Cook Inlet in the southern Kenai Peninsula. Some showers, mostly on the Shelikof Strait side of Kodiak Island with that westerly flow, keeping it dry on the east side there. Chiniak, Marmot Bay, Kodiak State Airport may have a dry night tonight. And some clearing continues for the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians. And the Aleutians pretty dry with light winds, weak high pressure just south of Atka Island. And that trough spreads rain down into the southern southeast coast. The periods of rain tonight for areas Valdez, Yakutat, Cordova, right on down to Annette, Metlakatla, and eastward over toward the border and a little beyond. And for Monday, again, wet conditions, cloudy and wet for the Panhandle, and that front pushes more rain into the central interior of the state from the central Arctic coast all the way down the Kuskokwim Valley. Western Alaska range starting to become increasing chances of rain east of the Alaska Range. Madanuska, Susitna Valley, for example, Kenai Peninsula, as the day wears on, should be back into the rain tomorrow afternoon. And showers to the Copper River Basin, showers to the eastern interior, and an area of rain extending back to the southwest coast, drying out for the Yukon Delta coast. And that low still sitting just north of the Bering Strait there. Gusty winds around that center, anywhere from 25 to 35 miles an hour. And light winds, by contrast, for the southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians, with a fair amount of clearing possible across that area. And moving on to the outlook for Tuesday. Again, that low finally pushes eastward into the northwest coast up there, but the westerly flow on the south side of the upper level system, again, develops another system and moves rapidly eastward. More rain coming in, moderate amounts of rain into the southwest coast, with periods of rain all the way northward across the northwest interior, Kobuk, Koyukuk Valley, southern slopes of the Brooks Range especially, north of the mountains up there, North Slope and the Arctic coast, areas of light rain and scattered showers, lighter amounts in those areas than there will be to the south. Showers over the central interior, then periods of rain, fog, Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, south central Alaska. Looks like a cloudy, cool, wet day for much of the southern part of the state, and showery for the Panhandle. Those showers become more isolated and less numerous as you head south, though, toward Dixon Entrance. You may see some clearing, and the Aleutians staying north or staying south of the action there. Light winds and chance of rain for the Fox Islands and Alaska Peninsula. And moving on to the lows for tonight. Again, mid-30s to lower 40s for the Arctic coast, and in the 30s for the Seward Peninsula once again. Had a low of 37 degrees this morning, and may see that again tomorrow morning with lows in the 40s to lower 50s elsewhere in the state. Warmest areas around Fairbanks, Susitna Valley, down into the Madanuska Valley as well, lower 50s, or near 50 actually for south central Alaska, lower 50s Kodiak Island, mid to upper 40s out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, lows 50 to 55 for the southeast coast. Highs tomorrow, not much warmer than your overnight lows for the Panhandle with all the clouds and moisture around, say 55 to 60, and lower 60s here for south central Alaska, with a little bit more in the way of possible sunshine, but not a whole lot. Mid-60s Copper River Basin, 60 to 65 over the eastern interior, maybe pushing near 70 over the Yukon Flats, but mid-60s for Eagle down into the eastern Alaska Range. Highs on the Arctic coast, mostly in the 40s, North Slope, 55 to 60, eastern North Slope areas, and mid to upper 50s. Out over the western interior, staying in the cool 40s for the Seward Peninsula and the St. Lawrence Island area. Lower 50s for the Pribilofs, and in the 50s for the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula. Mid-60s, Kodiak Island. And taking a look at the lows Tuesday morning, back into the mid-30s for the Arctic coast. Otherwise, upper 30s to lower 40s, North Slope into the Brooks Range, 40s to maybe near 50. Again, the warmest areas toward the mid and upper Tanana Valley areas. But Eagle down to 44, in the 40s to lower 50s for south central Alaska, areas south and east of the Alaska Range, lower 50s for the Panhandle, Kodiak Island, upper 40s for Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, as well as the Aleutians, mid 40s for the Pribilof Islands, and lower 40s there for St. Lawrence Island. Highs for Tuesday afternoon, again coming down from what they'll be tomorrow with the next round of clouds, heavier clouds and rainy conditions for southern Alaska, all in the 50s, some cases lower 50s to near 50, say for Sparavon. Otherwise, upper 50s for Bristol Bay, near 60 Kodiak Island, maybe Homer, Seldovia could see lower 60s. Otherwise, 50, mid to upper 50s, Copper River Basin, Mananuska, Susitna Valley, upper 50s, lower 60s for the Panhandle. And it's going to be really hard to find 70 degrees around the state on Tuesday. Best chance would be maybe Chalk-Yitzhak could push 70, but mid 60s more likely there, maybe upper 60s at best. Eagle 65, same thing for Northway. Near 60, as I mentioned, for Kodiak Island, lower to mid 50s out over the Aleutians, lower 50s for the Pribilofs, and then 45 to 50 for the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island. And again, the eastern North Slope, mid to upper 50s there, but the Arctic coast staying down in the 40s. With taking a closer up look at the Panhandle for tonight, lower 50s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First line weather graphic Monday morning, marginal VFR, there northeast interior, central eastern Arctic coast, followed by some IFR from the western Arctic coast right down into the Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, south and east of the Alaska Range, marginal VFR, all the way down to northern Kodiak Island, across the Gulf into the Panhandle, and then a band of IFR along the western slopes of the Alaska Range, and then down into northern Bristol Bay, Togiak Bay, Kuskokwim Bay to the Pribilofs, and just north of the Aleutians. Otherwise, north and south, not too bad, except for some IFR out over the St. Lawrence Island area to the Bering Strait. Otherwise, good VFR for the Aleutians. And looking at the afternoon, VFR, the Aleutians, IFR, those slides into Shimei and Attu. IFR also for the western Alaska Peninsula. Marginal VFR up toward the Aleutian Range becomes IFR, northern Bristol Bay into the southwest interior. That pushes across southern Cook Inlet and extends up along the western Alaska Range to Windy Pass and up to Nenana, possibly Fairbanks IFR for the afternoon. Lots of marginal VFR with areas of IFR over just about all of interior Alaska, mostly marginal though for the North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle as well as Kodiak Island. And then for Tuesday morning, we've got a band of IFR there, band of marginal VFR along the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, IFR south central Alaska up into the Tanana Valley, and actually pushing all the way up into the Yukon Flats, and then back down across the Copper River Basin, eastern Alaska Range also, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, northern Cook Inlet, all IFR to Yakutat IFR, then marginal VFR for the southeast coast, and marginal VFR western interior to the northern Bering Sea, some IFR along the central and eastern Arctic coast, and then VFR central southern Bering Sea, including the Pribilofs. But that gives way to solid IFR for the southern central Bering Sea or the southwest Bering Sea, and a band of IFR into the Pribilof Islands, the Fox Islands, and cutting across southern Alaska there, widespread IFR for the Susitna, Mananuska Valley areas, and the Copper River Basin down into Turnagain Arm and Resurrection Bay, eastern Kenai Peninsula, all IFR eastward into the northern Panhandle. Marginal VFR for the southeast coast. And for Anatuvik and Adigan, IFR, expect IFR at some point in the day on Monday for both passes. Lake Clark and Merrill, same forecast, IFR, especially on the western approaches. Rainy IFR, windy IFR, Isabel, marginal VFR at times throughout the entire day Monday, marginal at times for Mentasta, marginal VFR at times for Tanita as well, mostly marginal for Portage, and Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR. Freezing levels, cool air over the northern Bering Sea, at the surface there over the Russian Far East, and then 2,000 feet over the Chukchi Sea to the Bering Strait coast, western Seward Peninsula. Much warmer conditions over the southern Bering Sea and the western Aleutians, 12 to 14,000 feet there, and about 8,000 feet in over interior Alaska, sloping 8 to 12,000 feet over the Panhandle. Icing moisture moving eastward, so diminishing from west to east tomorrow, but look for at least isolated moderate rime icing covering much of the central eastern interior, trailing back across the southern Bering Sea, Pribilof Islands into Bristol Bay, as well as the North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle. Pretty much icing free for the Aleutians in the northern Bering Sea and the northwest coastal areas. And for the jet stream, westerly flow, 115 knots there, pushing that area of moisture eastward, dropping off to about 80 knots along the North Gulf Coast, taking a turn to the southeast with a peak wind flow of 90 knots there right along the Panhandle, along the outer coastline, and moving on to 9,000 feet. Pretty good low center there near the Bering Strait, and 65 knot west-northwesterlies right across St. Lawrence Island, 45 knots in over the western interior down to Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula areas, and at 3,000 feet west-southwest, 50 knots into the southern Seward Peninsula, Nome, Golovin, and the western Norton Sound area, west 40 knots Bristol Bay across the Aleutian Range and Kodiak Island, and that's going to result in some isolated moderate chop for Kodiak Island, the Aleutian Range, southern Cook Inlet, but considerable moderate chop likely there for the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, and western Seward Peninsula, and the coastal areas of the Yukon Delta.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service with another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining me today are not just one, but two people, both with the last name Stevens, which is even more fun, but no relation. We have Eric Stevens from GINA and George Stevens, who is a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And today you guys brought a really cool toy, or I should say tool, with you. It's a sandbox, but why are you guys working on a sandbox?
Well, it's part of our senior design project, and we were approached by EPSCoR to build this for them. They had a proof of concept that they developed about a year ago, I think, and they wanted a more robust version that they could pack onto a plane and take places, and it's a handy learning tool for kids and adults.
So you're a mechanical engineering student. You've built a traveling sandbox for the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, EPSCoR, and GINA's facilitated this. But why do we need a traveling sandbox?
Well, the prototype was such a big hit that they decided they wanted another one, actually two, that that would be easier to travel with, possibly marketable even.
Okay, so this is a traveling sandbox that's got a lot of bits and pieces and a computer hooked up to it. What is the computer doing with the sand?
The computer actually uses a Kinect sensor to read the topography of the sand or the shape of the sand, and then the computer translates that into information which it projects using a projector onto the sand, showing topographical lines and which is representative of the shape of the sand.
Okay, so this is a live mapping tool?
Yeah. It's interactive. As you're moving your hands through it, it is actively following and changing the lines to fit what you're doing.
That sounds like something I could have in my backyard.
Yep.
It'd be a lot of fun. So you guys had to change the design a little bit to make this more Alaska-fied, right?
Yeah.
Okay, how'd you do that?
Well, the original was made out of basically lumber and Simpson strong tie type stuff, and we rebuilt it to make it lighter and basically more transportable. We can pack it down to a fairly small size, and it can be loaded onto a plane and flown anywhere in the state.
Which you guys did today. And you have plans to take this in other places of Alaska, right?
Yep, we're actually going to be headed down to Homer with it later today.
Okay, very good. Eric, how does this fit into science learning around Alaska?
Well, you know what? I think it is a tool and it is a toy. And it brings out a smile from an 8-year-old and the smile from a 48-year-old with that inner 8-year-old wanting to get out. The sandbox, it's an interactive learning tool that teaches us how topography in the 3 dimensions is related to, say, a 2-dimensional map. More about that later. Just like George was saying, it's got a Kinect sensor, not just for video games anymore. It can sense out the lay of the land there, feeds that information in the computer. Computer identifies that, sends a signal to a projector to send topographic lines to map over that lumpy ground. So you get a 3-dimensional topo map out of it. And my favorite thing about it, this is the thing that stops people at the trade show, they stop at your booth and don't leave, is that you run your hand through that sandbox and it responds in real time. It remaps the topography as you get to be Mr. Tectonic Plate Drifter there. You can make things how you want. Well, what if we made a really high mountain here and a low valley there, and the lines adjust to what you did? It's a learning tool because it shows you that connection between these two-dimensional topo lines and what's really out in Alaska. And Alaska's a place with all kinds of topography. You know, we're from the Great Plains, where topo maps tend to be just like blank pieces of paper, but Alaska is particularly gifted in this regard, and this tool helps us, I think, learn more about our state, really.
Absolutely. And so this is going to enhance STEM learning, the science, technology, engineering, and math, in many different locations around Alaska. Then this would be something that kids and teachers can get their hands on.
It sure is. And I mentioned the it's like flypaper at a booth that, or at the Science Potpourri when we had Greg's original version of this sandbox, and that one was made out of scraps of wood, and it was a prototype. But even that one, before it had some of the refinements that George and crew have made for this newer, upscaled, maybe a 2.0 version of the sandbox, even that one was so attractive to people. It just demonstrated that this has potential to be a learning tool, an outreach tool, an education tool that now is portable and can go places in Alaska. Of course, there's only one sandbox, can't be everywhere at once, but hopefully it gets out there, gets the word out about EPSCoR and what science is being done here for Alaskans.
All right, that sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to get my hands in the sand and try this out for myself. We're going to demonstrate this here in our next segment of Alaska Weather Facts, but before we go, we want to remind you that EPSCoR, which is a new acronym for me now, but I'm going to remember this because you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter, and I invite you to do that. Alaska EPSCoR is also something that facilitates science learning at the University of Alaska around the state, and that stands for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. So check that out and make sure you tune in tomorrow because we're going to have the next version where we actually get our hands in the sand and check out how this works and demonstrates that topography. So for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you again next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And moving on to the coastal water forecast for the coastal panhandle, west winds 15 knots on the central and south coast with seas at around 8 feet. Lighter winds up on the north coast from the southwest at 10 knots, seas 7 feet there. Lincoln Glacier Bay, south winds 20 knots. Stevens Passage, southeast winds 20 knots. And the southern inner channels, including Clarence Strait, south winds 15 knots. And for the day on Tuesday, lighter winds out along the coast, west-southwest 10 knots for the south coast, and south winds 10 to 15 knots up north. Lincoln Island Glacier Bay still in a southerly wind at 20 knots, especially in the afternoon with 4-foot seas, and south winds at 10 knots for Stevens Passage, Clarence Strait southeast at 10. Prince William Sound, east winds 10 knots, seas 2 feet. Eastern North Gulf Coast, south winds 15 knots. Western North Gulf Coast and the Barren Islands, winds will be out of the west at 20 knots on Monday with 8-foot seas. Small craft advisories for Kamishak Bay, west winds 25 knots. Small craft advisories also in the forecast for Cook Inlet for south to southwest winds at 25 knots and seas as high as 7 feet. And for Tuesday, small craft advisories continue for Cook Inlet, south winds 25 knots with 7-foot seas. Kamishak Bay, the Barren Islands, southwest winds 15 knots, and for the North Gulf Coast, winds will be out of the south at 15 knots, 5 to 7-foot seas. Prince William Sound, southeast winds 15 knots with 3-foot seas. Kodiak Island, west-southwest winds at 30 knots. Small craft advisories for the Alaska Peninsula for west-southwest winds at 25 knots. And Bristol Bay, small craft advisories for southwest winds at 25 knots, seas just under 10 feet. For Tuesday, Bristol Bay, southwest winds 25 knots, and small craft advisories continue for the Alaska Peninsula for west winds at 25 knots with seas around 10 feet. Kodiak Island, southwest winds 20 knots with 7-foot seas. Fox Islands, southwest winds 15 to 25 knots with 5 to 8-foot seas. AKwx central Aleutians, southwest 10 to 20, and for the western Aleutians, west-southwest at 20 knots with 5-foot seas. For Tuesday, western Aleutians, southwest winds 20 knots, seas 5 to 6 feet. Central Aleutians, west-southwest at 20 knots, and for the eastern Aleutians, west-southwest 20 to 25 knot winds with seas running 8 to 9 feet. And up along the southwest coast, small craft advisories for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, west winds 25 knots with 10-foot seas. Small craft advisories for the Pribilof Islands, southwest winds 25 knots with 9-foot seas, and variable winds at 25 knots for St. Matthew Island. Small craft advisories for St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound. And for Norton Sound, winds will be southwest at 25 knots, and in the case of St. Lawrence Island, southwest 30 knots with 7-foot seas. And the Yukon Delta coast, they'll have the lightest winds from the southwest at 20 knots. On Tuesday, west winds 25 knots blowing across the northern Bering Sea right into the southwest coast with seas running 8 to 9 feet. Pribilof Islands also looking at this west wind at 25 knots. Norton Sound, southwest 25 knots with 5-foot seas, and St. Lawrence Island winds diminishing to 20 knots from the west with seas at around 7 feet. Arctic coast, east side, east winds 10 to 15 knots, central coast east at 20 knots, western coast west at 20 knots, and from Wales to Cape Beaufort, southerly winds 20 to 25 knots with seas running at about 4 feet. And then for Tuesday, winds change direction out of the east and northeast from Wales to Cape Beaufort at about 20 knots with 5 to 7-foot seas. Western Arctic coast, east winds at 20 knots with 5-foot seas. And then for the central coast, west winds at 20 knots. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast on Tuesday, west winds 10 to 15 knots. And for tonight again, front pushing into the western interior with the low pressure area over the Chukchi Sea. So periods of rain and fog and locally gusty winds associated with that. But rain will be just north of the Pribilof Islands. They'll be spreading eastward under westerly flow into the southwest coast. Interior, cloudy skies, areas of rain and showers just about everywhere south of the Brooks Range. And periods of rain for the North Gulf Coast and Panhandle, but dry for the southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians with some clearing along with light winds. And for tomorrow, periods of rain over interior Alaska and the Panhandle and into the central Bering Sea. Pretty nice though for the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians. And then for Tuesday, dry for the Aleutians, some showers for the Fox Islands, periods of rain over all interior Alaska, cool temperatures, cloudy skies, breezy conditions in the northern Bering Sea.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.